Well, welcome everyone. You'll see that we have a slide on the screen, Devva's room with beautiful Devva in her wings and holding her wand, wearing her glasses and her beautiful earrings. Info on future and past events, registration, playlist, and donation opportunity is available at bit.ly, bit.ly/Devva's room, capital D, EVVAS, capital ROOM. There's a QR code on the screen. This session, as always, is co-sponsored by Disability History and Culture Collective, DHACC, and I Love You Lead On Community. Next slide. Tonight, we are really excited to hear from Jim Conroy about Pennhurst as a landmark in disability rights history. Again, we have on the slide beautiful graphic of Devva, a QR code, and a way to find out more information about previous and future upcoming events. Next slide. Coming next month, January 14th, we're going to hear about who was Henry Viscardi Jr. The Disability History Museum at the Viscardi Center is going to talk to us about a history of the museum. We'll have a virtual tour by Natalie Reyes, who is the director. Next slide. And our next upcoming event before that happens is going to happen on Tuesday, December 23rd from 5 to 8 p.m. We will have ASL interpretation from 5:30 to 7:30. And this is something that all of you can share with your networks. This is going to be the first of quarterly virtual gatherings on disability history museum work, trying to bring everyone into one space who is working on collections, looking for collections, doing museum work, anyone that you know of in the globe. We're open to everyone. You can register at bit.ly/DHACC in all caps -quarterly with quarterly capitalized. And there's also a QR code. We'll be sending out some emails to people that we know that are in this space. But if you're on the call tonight and you're thinking of someone that would be perfect to come to this, this would be the first. And we're trying to do it before the holidays and between the holidays so that everyone can be included. So take down that information. We'll hopefully be able to put it in the chat as well. Next slide. If you need any assistance during the event, contact us for help or accessibility requests. If you need help accessing the event or want to request a voice option during the presentation, email us at capital L EAD, capital O N, at capital I, capital LOVE, capital YOU dash capital LEAD, capital ON.com. Lead on at iloveyouleadon.com. Next slide. Zoom etiquette and access. During the presentation, all Zoom attendees will be muted to support access and reduce background noise. If you need to use voice to communicate during the presentation, email us and we will arrange a separate voice space just for that. After the presentation ends, we'll open up the mics for conversation that will be unrecorded, one voice at a time as usual. Chat comments will be read aloud to provide access. If you don't want the chat read aloud, you can use a private message to one of us. Next slide. Accessibility info. American Sign Language, ASL, is provided for the presentation and will be spotlighted. Auto captions are available and can be viewed on screen or as a transcript. In the Zoom toolbar, there is a CC option. If it is not there, click the 3 dots for more options and locate it there. The ability to show, hide, or adjust captions is there, as well as the option to view captions as a transcript. Next slide. What makes Devva's room unique? Disability studies tends to be discussed in academic settings using complicated jargon, making it inaccessible to many. Here we take it out of the classroom and into conversation. In keeping with that, we invite our ASL interpreter to participate fully, asking questions and joining the discussion if and when they have them. Next slide. Devva's Room sessions are recorded. All Devva's Room sessions are recorded and will be available on our playlist within a few days with corrected captions and transcripts. You can find the playlist on the Devva's Room website at bit.ly/capital DEVVAS, capital ROOM, bit.ly Devva's Room. There's also a QR code. Please let us know if you need to revisit this information. Next slide. And without further ado, we will turn it over to our presenter tonight, Jim Conroy.
Good evening. Thanks for coming. I'm Jim Conroy. I'm white male, age 77, white hair, white mustache, white, short, silly-looking beard, and I'm outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm in my living room in a recliner with two screens in front of me, and I intend to show just a few slides and talk about them to tell a quick story that we all know, that a large part of the history of, in our lifetime, of disability rights has been the fight against being put into institutions. So that's what this is about. The largest study ever done of getting people out of institutions was conducted from 1979 to 1992. And I'd like to tell you about that. So is the screen sharing showing up?
It is.
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
It is.
Thank you. Well, the first slide really summarizes the whole study. And I was asked to talk about how we learned that people will be much better off if they get out of those old, outmoded, really terrible institutions. And I'll say first, Pennhurst was like every other institution in America. And at one time, we had 293 of them. Pennhurst is about 15 miles northwest of Philadelphia. Pennsylvania used to have 12 of them. Pennhurst was unique in that it was close to a lot of lawyers in Philadelphia. And that really set the stage for litigation. The injustice and the outrageous inhumanity of the institution was closer to a major urban center and a lot of lawyers. So Pennhurst opened in 1908. It immediately became overcrowded and full of people who never should have been sent there. And by the 1960s, it was clear that it was not a fit place for human beings, and exposés were revealed in the press every year from 1908 until 1968. It was overcrowded, it was understaffed, and it was just like all the other 293 institutions in America. 1968 changed things when a courageous young reporter in his 20s heard about Pennhurst from the Arc of Philadelphia and went out to see it and did a 5-night expose with cameras. By the way, that's one of the greatest stories in our field of how this young newsman got in to see the horrors of Pennhurst and made a change that changed the world. Well, that series of shows on channel NBC TV Philadelphia in 1968 was channeled into people's living rooms on their screens, so mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters could see it for the first time, and they couldn't turn away. It was like the Vietnam War. We used to be able to say, well, we didn't know. And after that expose called Suffer the Little Children, America couldn't say that anymore. We did know. We saw it. And it was intolerable. I myself got out of college 2 years later, got a job in developmental disabilities when the DD Act was just passed in 1970. And I was assigned to draw a sample and travel the country seeing places where folks with all kinds of disabilities were supported. And in those days, it was mostly special education classrooms, nursing homes, and public institutions, and of course, psychiatric hospitals. Oh, so I'm going to go right to the slide now and start with the Pennhurst Longitudinal Study. Began in 1979. And it was created because a federal lawsuit and a federal decision had ordered that all the people at Pennhurst, at that time 1,156 people, had to leave and have a chance to live in a small family-like home in regular communities. And in 1979, nobody in America really knew what was going to happen. In fact, there was significant doubt because deinstitutionalization of psychiatric hospitals had already begun in 1955. And we, as Americans, betrayed, in my opinion, one of the worst betrayals in American history. We betrayed people with mental illness and mental health problems by promising them that they could go out in the community and have community supports. So the Community Mental Health Act of 1963 was passed and never funded. So in the mental health deinstitutionalization movement, 550,000 people left institutions in those years, but they had no place to go, no job, no place to live. And they wound up in jails and homeless and on the street and in nursing homes. So that was the only history people knew in 1979. So the Pennhurst study was funded by 5 different agencies of the federal government, and it was to be the largest study ever done. We tracked 1,156 people. We visited every person every year and surveyed every family every year. We collected baseline data, we call it, in 1979 for every person about their age, their functional abilities, their education, their family background, their contacts, their medications, their health, quality of life, and services delivered in dozens of dimensions. So we could track them and measure, really just measure the evidence about one single question. And that's what I want to emphasize right now. This study had one question, not 5 or 6, just one. Are the people better off when they leave or not? So there were subsidiary questions like how much better, in what ways, and what did it cost? But with all of that, we measured qualities of life and services, and it went on for decades. I'm going to go to the next slide. Which this slide is a complicated one with a lot of material on it, but what it is about is aspects of quality of life that we measured, and I just want to read a few examples. Skill development, power to make choices or self-determination, behavior, health, medications, hours of productive activity, relationships, family contacts, individual satisfaction. I'll tell you later, the people at Pennhurst were mostly non-speakers, but we interviewed every single person who was able to communicate, whether it was verbal or not, every year. So I'm going to switch to the next slide, which is about how modern outcome studies are conducted. As researchers, I just want to tell you what we were up to and how we did it. We needed access to each person and whoever knew that person best in every home, every year. From 1979 to 1992, we visited about 2,000 people every year. There were a lot of other people who, like Philadelphia, wanted us to visit everybody in their community settings, not just the Pennhurst folks. So we went face to face. In California, a later study, we visited 1,215 people. But the point of this slide is, once a year, our team members, highly trained, sensitive, most of them siblings and parents and people with disabilities themselves, our trained interviewers went out and saw the people face to face and interviewed them and whoever knew them best to find out if they were better off. The next slide is called What Kind of People? And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the people at Pennhurst in 1979. They were an average of 39 years old. They had been at Pennhurst an average of 24 years. So on the average, the people there had gone in when they were 15, and they had been there for 24 years. They were about 2/3 male, 1/3 had seizures, 13% had no vision, 4% had no hearing, 18% were non-ambulatory, unable to walk, 50% didn't use verbal language, 47% were less than fully toilet trained in 1979. 40% were reported to be violent at times. And in ancient, antiquated jargon, 86% had the label severe or profound. And in those days, the jargon was severely or profoundly mentally retarded. And I'm happy to see, since I got into this field in 1970, that jargon is gone, except from the White House. Sorry about that, no politics. The next slide is a graph. Pennhurst class members' adaptive behavior development. And this is the first outcome, and I'm going to go fast from here on. The first outcome was, are people better off in terms of taking care of their own needs, being independent, self-care, activities of daily living? And that's one of the number one things we want to do for people, is not just support them, but help them support themselves, right? It's called self-determination. This graph goes from the left, 1979, 1978. The graph shows about 60 points out of 100. That was the average skill level, adaptive behavior level of the people at Pennhurst. Now, the graph goes over to the right with 4 more bars, and every bar goes up, 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 up. People gained, when they left Pennhurst, they gained in the ability to take care of their own needs. They learned, they made progress, they became more and more independent. And I'm not saying independent, I'm saying more and more independent. So by the time the official study ended in 1986, people had gone up about 15% in their self-care ability skills. 15%, by the way, is astounding, because the average person had been at Pennhurst for 24 years, and they had lost skills for 24 years. Down, down, down. The environment was crushing them. And yet, people came out of Pennhurst and went up, up, up. And boy, I choke up on this one. That's about human potential. No matter what we did, the potential was still there. And that's probably one of the happiest graphs I'll ever make. The next graph is about self-control of challenging behaviors. And it is just the same way. There's a bar on the left that's at 18, and every bar to the right of it goes up, 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 until by 1986, people had gained more control to control their own behavior, of about 10% improvement. So self-care abilities, challenging behavior, both improved. Next, the next slide is Pennhurst strong initial family resistance. This is important, very important to me, because during this study, I became a parent. And it was enlightening for me to realize what agony the parents were going through. I could talk about that for the rest of the hour. I only intend to talk for about 25 minutes. This graph shows that most families strongly disagreed. Down at the bottom of this graph is a blue bar that shows that 60% of the families we surveyed at the beginning strongly disagreed with the idea of community placement. That's true all over the world. Families who went through the agony of separating from their sons and daughters and brothers and sisters had to believe that they had done the right thing. And they kept believing that. And the only thing that ever changed it was the next slide. When their relatives actually moved to community homes, this graph shows about 80% of families, after it happened, reported they were very satisfied. And that's the biggest change in all my years of social research that I've ever seen. So families go from night to day, from fear to joy. And I had thousands of letters in the office of my Temple University Research Center saying, I was so against this and I can't believe it. Now I'm so happy. My son has never been happier. And the next graph is about that. We asked families a different question. Has your relatives general happiness changed since moving. And this graph has only 3 bars on it: much happier, happier, and the same. The bars for less happy and much less happy are empty. Every family surveyed said, oh, my relative is happier or the same. And nobody said less happy. This was hundreds of families, so you don't get this in social research. This is remarkable stuff. And it's part of what changed our knowledge base about whether people were better off. The next graph is about mortality. And I'm not going to describe the graph in detail, but I'm going to tell you that we published an article in 1996 that showed that by the time Pennhurst was empty, there were about 200 people still alive who would have been dead if they had stayed at Pennhurst. That was published in the Journal of the American Association of, then called, Mental Retardation. So in those ways, behavior, adaptive behavior, challenging behavior, family opinions, and life itself, people were better off. A subsidiary question is in the next slide. What did it cost? Well, the Pennhurst study showed, again in a bar graph, the total cost of being in the institution in those days was about $45,000 per person per year. And when they moved to the community, it went down to about, less than 40,000, less than 40,000. So the individual person actually cost society less when they moved to the community, and yet they were better off. By the way, that's a long story there, because the reason for the cost difference was we pay people in the community horribly, and we don't give them full benefits like the state employees at the institutions. So there's a lot embodied in that graph. The next graph is actually a table, and this is a summary table of all the ways in which we measured whether people were better off. Independence, yes. Social behavior, yes. Self-determination, yes. Productivity, yes. Integration, community attitudes, that's neighbors. Consumer satisfaction, remember, we interviewed every person every year that we could in any way they could. Yes. I mean, in years of visiting people, we only got, I recall 6 people who said, if I could, I'd go back to Pennhurst. So it's overwhelming. Family satisfaction, you've already seen that. Qualities of environment, whether it's home-like, whether it's normalized, whether it has good physical quality, yes. Service delivery, people got more services in every way. With case studies, we told stories of individual transformations. Were they better off? Yes, everybody in the study. Cost decreased by about 26% in a matched comparison study. So the next slide is, did the Pennhurst results meet the scientific test of replication? Here's the thing about science nerds. We know that the real test of science isn't whether you publish or not. It's whether other people do studies and get the same results. And that's called replication. Well, this table shows that we followed 1,356 people in Connecticut. Another team followed 1,000 people in Oklahoma. Another saw the first state to close all of its institutional beds, New Hampshire. And by 1989, the Laconia State Center was closed and 400 people had moved. In North Carolina, we tracked 1,000 people who had, 1,100 people who had dual diagnosis, that is involvement with criminal justice system and a developmental disability label. 200 people in Kansas, 400 people in Illinois, 2,400 people in California. This slide is intended to show everybody it wasn't just the Pennhurst study. It was everybody in every state who did these studies, and they all used pretty much the same instruments and same methodology. With some variation, people came in with their own instruments, but everybody got basically the same results. The families were overwhelmingly, transformatively happier, and people did not ever want to go back. They're glad to be out, and qualities of life improved in every way, and costs went down. By the end of the 80s, we had, into the mid-90s, we had followed more than 7,000 people in all those states. And we did studies in Australia, Canada, England, New Zealand, France, Sweden, and so on. And we helped with studies in Ukraine and Georgia and Russia and Mexico, and on and on and on. This is very solid science. And the last graph here is called institutional decline and community rise. On the left of the graph is a sort of a rising and lowering set of bars in green. That graph is the graph of how many Americans lived in institutions. And in 1955, it was about 110,000 and went up to almost 200,000 in 1969. And then the green bars just continue to drop until they go to near zero by 2010. And now, from our peak of 193,000 people in these institutions, we're now down to about 10,000. So this graph shows that America really, really changed in our lifetimes, and particularly in mine, because I got into this mess right at the peak of institutionalization in America with 193,000 people. Oh, I think I'm the luckiest scientist I've ever known, because I got to watch this and watch hundreds of thousands of lives be changed. On the right of the graph are red bars, which show a constant increase from zero in 1970 up to over 500,000 by 2015. And now those red bars are counting the number of people who live in small community homes instead of institutions. All those people would have wound up in institutions if we hadn't created community support systems. And so now, today, we have about 700,000 people in small community homes all over the country, and we still don't pay people properly, and there's still lots of problems, but they are, in every study, in just about every way, better off than they were before. That was brief enough, and I think I'd like to stop there. That's the study of the studies. They were done all over the country and all over the world, and I'm proud and happy and lucky that I got to take part in it. Let's open it up.
I see
Well,
one
Jim, I've
question.
got a question.
Oh, you got it. Okay, good.
How many people were discovered to be grossly misdiagnosed, or because of life in an institution, they were not offered any kind of educational opportunities, so they were completely thwarted from being as capable as they could be?
Great one. I unfortunately could talk about that till midnight. The answer to grossly misdiagnosed is a lot. People were placed there from 1908 onward who never should have been there. I've got an admission document, the admission form, in its original yellow, multi-copied form in my office, from a kid who was driven there by his dad because he had one seizure. And his dad took him to Pennhurst and dropped him there. And he never saw them again. And he lived his life there and died there. The form says that Eddie had one seizure and he pronounced poon instead of spoon. And he spent his life at Pennhurst. Then there were people who didn't speak English. And there were children with physical disabilities. And, children with what we now would call on the spectrum. And on and on and on. There were years in the 30s when unwed mothers were sent there. So by the time I got there, I'd say it was about 20%, maybe 20 to 25% of the people absolutely never should have been there and were misdiagnosed. There's a second part to your question, though, about the loss of skills. People who went to Pennhurst with some skills lost them year after year after year. By the way, that's how we won the lawsuit. I was an active witness in the original lawsuit. We showed that people came in with this level of skills, I'm raising my hands up halfway up the screen, and over the years, they just decreased down, 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 and lost those skills. In fact, the leader of the opposition to the Pennhurst lawsuit one of the founders of Voice of the Retarded. If you've heard of that or not, it's now called, that has a new name now. Anyway, her daughter went to Pennhurst, and we actually reviewed her records and saw that she went in with some speech and able to feed herself and drink, and 2 years later she did not speak or feed herself at all. So people came in with skills, and those skills were taken away. Again, that's how we won the lawsuit. We took away their rights and their freedom, and we should have given them something that would benefit them. Instead, we hurt them.
Katya Vertis speaking. I am repeating the question I wrote in the chat regarding the cost graph. This idea that it costs 26% less to for each individual in a community home. How much of that is represented in the catastrophic failures of basic care payment and minimal pay for those doing the care, therapy, support positions in those environments versus in the institutions? And is there any estimate of what the cost comparison would have been if if the funding promises were ever kept? And I mean, I know it's kind of hard to compare against the institutions in that while they nominally provided a whole lot of things, they actually provided mostly just torture and abuse. But that element of cost comparison, I am very curious as to just how much of it is completely deceptive based on the failures of bothering to do the things promised.
Thank you, Katya. That's really terribly important, because in some ways we sold deinstitutionalization on the basis of cost savings. And that was terrible, and it was wrong, because the answer to your question is, one way that you asked the question is, how much of the savings could be attributed to lower staff salaries and benefits? And the answer is all of it. There's a study, a meta-analysis in the 1990s from University of Minnesota that showed that if salaries and benefits had been equal, there would have been no cost savings, which to me was fine, because I didn't care about the cost savings. I cared that people got better lives. So the answer is, we can give better lives with the same money. And it was terribly dangerous of us, all of us, to sell the idea of deinstitutionalization on the basis of cost savings. That was dangerous and a mistake, and we can't do that anymore. Thank you, Katya. That's a very insightful, important question.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
My husband's answering in the kitchen. Jim, first of all, thank you so much for this firsthand account. I am so moved by the nuance that you're sharing. Of course, anyone who's been to Partners in Policymaking knows the story of Pennhurst. And myself, I was an IM4Q monitor for many years. I wanted to ask, I know that the Pennhurst class is a protected class, and I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what that actually meant. I know that from my understanding, they were rightfully a class that should have all their needs met. But I wonder how that differed from maybe others living in a CLA. I was wondering if you could just offer a little bit of background on, I was always a little confused about what that meant. And then I have another follow-up question.
All right, I'll get back to you because that first one is one of my pet peeves too. So right on the button, Diane. We created a two caste system. We created a system in which the Pennhurst class members got all their needs met, almost no matter what, because they could always go to court. And the rest of the people, like in Philadelphia, didn't get as much. And that was just awful and unjust. Some of the attorneys would say, well, the Pennhurst people had been harmed so badly that they deserved the remedy. But still, we find ourselves on the horns of a moral dilemma. It was terrible, razor's edge of right and wrong. And I did a study myself of the two different qualities of life, class members and non-class members. I published that too. Yes, we did that. And whether it's justified or not, we can debate. But we certainly gave the people from Pennhurst better lives. And I don't think we made the other people's lives any worse. But that's what happened. Second question, please.
The second part was, given many of the people did suffer from abuse and neglect, were they able to find like a therapeutic environment? Did that provide them with access to resources, and just from a trauma-informed perspective, were they able to find that in the community, or maybe not? I don't know.
Yeah, you're really hitting the high notes here. This is one of the best parts of the story to me. Speaking for Ourselves was formed by people who came out of Pennhurst.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you what I witnessed. And there's a chapter in our book about this, but I'll just tell you quickly. Speaking for Ourselves started getting together in 1981, and it was years before the people started talking about the abuse they had suffered.
Sure, yeah.
Including every night. I want to footnote that by saying that I thought I was an expert. I had visited 150 institutions by the mid-'80s. It became my passion, and I got, as a researcher at Temple University, I got paid to go and investigate and study and document. And I thought I knew everything. And it wasn't until Speaking for Ourselves, the self-advocates started talking about their trauma, that I realized I didn't know anything, because I never went to those places at night.
Wow. Wow.
They started opening up to each other. A therapist came in, and they went for years. And those therapists and those members are still my friends. And they got a lot of help mostly from each other.
Yeah.
And all the others who didn't join Speaking for Ourselves, I don't know. I hope they got some help from individuals and families and therapists and the system. But I wanted to tell the happy story about Speaking for Ourselves. That's documented. It's known. They suffered greatly, and they recovered greatly. And they had such pleasure from Speaking for Ourselves.
Thanks very much.
Arturo, would you like to come off mute?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dr. Conroy, for this, presentation. Been so insightful, and just interacting with your work and engaging with, your research and your experiences is really, really remarkable. My question is from a background, in LEND, Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental and Related Disability, this program that is funded by the NIH. I'm a participant at Stony Brook, and we look at, interdisciplinary models and teams, and how, that approach can better the quality of life for neurodevelopmental, I should say people with neurodevelopmental disabilities, including people who are autistic. And I know you mentioned that it was the lawyers, right, and the attorneys that, resided near the institution that really, sparked something. So my question is, in other words, from your experience, did you witness or foresee any early emergence of interdisciplinary models in really ensuring that people, leaving Pennhurst could successfully live in community life?
Boy, did we. That's great, Arturo, because the attorneys in Philadelphia who got involved, they were hired by the ARC. the state ARC of Pennsylvania. And so they were working for the ARC. And during the preparation of the case and the argument in court, the state of the art in care in the late 1970s had to be presented to the judge. And the state of the art right then was becoming interdisciplinary planning, individualized planning, person-centered planning. That was just beginning. So all of those features were built into the court order. Nobody could leave Pennhurst until they had an individual plan with a person responsible for each goal, at least 20 hours of time outside the home in the community every week, and so on and so forth. So everybody had an individual plan in their hand when they left Pennhurst and got to their group home or community living arrangement or supported living setting. They had a plan, it was written, and they were accountable. That is one of the greatest revolutions I saw in my time in this field, was individualized interdisciplinary planning. Before that, I know it's hard to imagine, but the planning was done on the basis of a cottage. What do we do for the folks in this cottage? Because we're going to do the same thing for everyone. Everybody gets a toothbrush. I could go on and on. Everybody gets clothing which is stolen within a day or two. So individualized plans were crucial. And I'm glad you had a neurodevelopmental background and understood interdisciplinary individualized planning, because person-centered planning became the term of art. And by the late 80s, it was the state of the art and it was the accepted standard in the field. And that transformed more than just deinstitutionalization, that transformed care and support in general. John O'Brien and Connie Lyle O'Brien and Beth Mount and Jack Pierpoint, the heroes who started that movement and talked about it all over the country, they changed the world too.
Thank you so much.
Linda, would you like to come off mute?
I'm trying
Yep.
to figure.
Yeah,
Am I still muted?
No,
No,
you're good. We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. This version of Zoom is a little bit different. I first of all want to say, Dr. Conroy, that I'm a big fan of yours. In the beginning of my career, I worked for what was called then the core team.
Oh yeah.
That went out and did individualized programming in the CLAs to teach some skills like toothbrushing, and some folks had some really inconvenient behaviors, and I wondered if you had any data on not just the behaviors that people lost, but some of the I guess I'll say maladaptive behaviors they picked up while they were at Pennhurst.
Yeah, we attempted, by the way, thanks. And I'm glad you're on one of the core teams because they were revolutionary too. Sending specialists with specialized knowledge into a group home with poorly paid paraprofessionals was brilliant. And it really helped. And we tried to do studies of it, but we didn't have enough funding to do it right. We didn't have control groups. So I can't give a strict answer, but I can give impressions from, following these people for 20 plus years. The core teams and the special external influence and support made a huge difference. Especially, that turned into crisis management and,
Yes.
And core teams and in-home supports and so forth. And that was revolutionary too. It was immensely valuable and funny, strange, odd. It's another thing the non-class members didn't get.
Yes, that's correct.
But in most counties later, they got it much later. So now they're wandering core teams all over the 5-county area. Not enough.
Yeah.
Not skills, but you were part of something wonderful too, in my opinion.
Can I just make one more comment? I work for Philadelphia Intellectual Disability Services today, but for the last 7 years, we're still monitoring Pennhurst residents. We're still ensuring that people are getting the services that they need in their waivers plans. I will say I'm optimistic that a lot of the individuals who are not coming from institutions are getting more individualized and specialized service as part of their plans, only because we've all learned so much and we continue to learn. And I guess the last thing I want to say is it's my heartache, myself being a person with a disability, um, and having, working with my community for my lifetime, is that we still have people we're taking out of institutions, but we have a lot of people we still haven't figured out quite how to safely serve them. And we're trying very hard to develop new models all the time of services that can meet everybody's needs, because nobody wants to be in an institution. And we know that. And we know that even if they can't get everything that they really deserve, a lot of times their quality of life is still better. I mean,
Yeah.
so I'm very proud of what we do. I really am. Still
Thank you for
today.
your service, Linda. Thank you. And you made two wonderful points, in my opinion. One is we need more. We're always learning, and I'm not sure everybody's getting the individualized behavioral attention that they need. And so we're left with a lot of states are groping with this and beginning to create locked community homes.
Yeah.
Because if you're a danger to self and others,
Yeah. Yeah.
we haven't solved the problem properly.
But sometimes everything old is new again. This new program we're starting called START is in other states. But it's actually kind of, in my view, kind of a core team. And they're putting together a group of experts to go out and work with the people who are serving the individuals who are in the homes. So they're not going to provide direct service, but they're going to do consulting. And I'm thinking, yeah, core team is back. Yeah, baby.
That's funny.
But anyway, thank
I have
you.
a friend. My pleasure. I'm glad to meet you. I have a friend in California who headed core teams in institutions in both Massachusetts and Florida. They had roving teams of experts to go in and solve behavioral problems with the staff who didn't know how. And that's got to be part of today's system and every future system. And I'd like to take a minute to tell at least one story about how people changed so much. The best known in the country, in the world, I guess, about Pennhurst is Nicholas Romeo. He's the young man who was part of the Romeo versus Youngberg lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court and established the right to treatment for people in these institutions and outside the institutions. So Nick Romeo came from South Philly, and he didn't speak, and he didn't go to school because he wasn't allowed to go to school, which is what the first lawsuit was all about, get these kids able to go to school. So Nick didn't go to school. He was very close to his dad. His dad knew that his kids his age would make fun of him, so he taught Nick to box. Well, Dad died. Nick was very devastated, and he couldn't express himself. And professionals like me told his mom, send him to Pennhurst. So she did. Nick quickly got abused on a daily basis, but he could box. So suddenly he was in restraints. And the next thing you know, he was in 4-point restraints for 11 months in the medical center at Pennhurst. His case went to the Supreme Court, and everybody agreed, well, we can never put this guy in the community, but we have to assure his rights. And that thinking went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Well, in about 1995, with my co-president of the Pennhurst Memorial Alliance, Gene Searle, we went to give a talk at a college in North Philadelphia. And I know I'm going to choke up on this one. Somebody said, wait, there's a guy here who wants to see you. And Nick Romeo came into the room, not speaking with his two house parents or direct support workers. And we walked around. We did the rest of the talk walking around with Nick, who was just a pussycat. And he hadn't had an outburst in 20 years. And he died about 10 years ago, smiling with a soda in his hand in a home that loved him. So he was the impossible person who could never be treated safely. Actually, he could be fine if he felt safe. And that's one of the things we did when we moved abused people out of institutions. We had some rough times, didn't we? But we have so many unbelievable success stories about the impossible people. So I guess the message is never give up. We can do it.
Hey, Jim, it's Alice Wershing. So I know that you're going to talk maybe after the break a little bit about the work that you're doing with the collections and documenting what has happened at Pennhurst. And I'm wondering, because as a classroom teacher, my students came from the state institution in Nashville at the time. The law was passed for them to go to school, but many of them were from other counties other than the Metro Nashville, Davidson County. And so at age 18, we received a new group of students, in addition to the students who were already coming to the school that we were teaching at, special education school. Some of them that were not conserved were taken to the courthouse and registered to vote so that they could come to our school. And so my question is how things were handled in the Pennhurst situation as people that were 18 or 18 and older moved out into the institution. So that's part one of the question. And then number two, how those people who you mentioned, Nicholas, who passed, are there others, and perhaps Linda can chime in on this, who are still being followed, and what's happened to those people as well? Thanks.
Well, you raised, I think, the first point about conservatorship, guardianship, and all those issues. And in the Pennhurst study, we tracked how many people had guardians and how involved they were. We didn't, I can't report any major conclusions from that, except that people who had guardians were much more difficult to get out of Pennhurst because the guardians generally opposed it. And that's true internationally. If you have strong family involvement in the institution, the families tend to try to resist leaving the institutions because they did what they thought was right. They did what we told them to do. And what do you expect? So the handling of guardianship afterward, I can't report on, but I'd like to ask Linda. And I'd like to add that in the modern world, we've moved towards supported decision-making, which is a more advanced model and much gentler on rights. Linda, anything to say?
I wish I had numbers on the number of Pennhurst residents that are still alive.
Oh, I know
I
that
do
one.
know. Oh, you do?
Yeah, 343.
Okay, because I know that the other day I was supposed to review someone's plan and I was reading it, and this individual is well into her 80s. And I saw, here she is, a Pennhurst resident. I do know that there's a lot of work being done to encourage communication skills and decision making, and they use a model, and most of the plans include the way the person expresses themselves. And if they express themselves non-verbally, what do some of their signs and signals mean? And so forth. And this is all written into the plan. But in reference to people gaining their rights or using their rights for voting and other things, everyone is offered all the time, every year at least, Do you want to change your providers? Do you know about your right to report abuse? You know, all of these things are documented every year. And if people want to vote, there is, you know, an effort to make sure that they get out and do it. So, as far as I'm concerned, you know, all we're trying to do on our end is try to figure out more ways of creating the model of, you know, as much um, you know, direction as you possibly can, as much a supported decision making if you really need that. Um, and it seems to be going very well. I only, for what it's worth, I work for this city now for more than 7 years. And before that, I worked at a center for independent living. But in all the time that I've worked for IDS, I have only seen one time that someone reluctantly was still in need of some restraints for self-injurious behavior. Only one time. And it was so well documented. Every other resort would be used before that. That was exactly the absolute last resort. You know, so in terms of giving people freedom in every way that we can, you know, we really work hard to make sure. And in my own personal observation, and this is my last comment, is that behavior is a way of communicating when you're not verbal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And most people, if they're given an opportunity to make decisions, even if they're pointing at, you know, this or that or the other thing, they're happier. And a lot of the inconvenient behavior that they have, that they've used in the past, will disappear because they get the sense that they're being respected.
Mhm.
And it really is about respect. You know, I can't say enough that if there were 11,000 more ways that I can discover that we can give people more choices and self-determination, we would do it. You know, we can do it. We just have to figure it out.
Hey,
It's
hey,
on us to figure it out. It's not on them to figure it out. You know,
Yep.
they're trying to tell us what they want, and all we have to do is break the code.
That's so wonderful. I spent 25 later years studying self-determination and whether people were better off. And it turned out in all those years of research in 16 states with $1 million a year, we found out if you take away some of the stupid rules, people's behavior is not so bad because dumb restrictions result in resistance. All right. God, what an insight.
and giving choices and a way to communicate. Absolutely. We've gone a little bit over than our usual hour, and I'm so enjoying this. All of my questions come from work that I did in the late 70s into the early 80s before I ended up back in graduate school and then on to assistive technology. But it's all I'm glad to see that we've moved in a good direction in terms of self-determination. Unfortunately, I had to become a conservator in order for one of my students to be able to not be in restraints and have a better quality of life. So we've gone past our original hour. Michelle, are you needing a break for about 10 minutes, 5 minutes? Yes, please. So we will take a couple minutes, about 5 minutes. And so that has us coming back at 10 after the hour. Is that enough time for everyone? So come on back and we will continue with Jim. Has their hand up, and Fred has his hand up as well. So we'll continue on after we take a short break here. So our interpreter comes back. All right, Michelle has rejoined us. So we'll hear more from Jim in a few moments.
Hi, everyone.
I know
Thank you.
there are a couple people that had questions, so we'll get to them in a minute. If you're enjoying this programming, this is the PBS NPR portion of the meeting. We are in deep need of funding to continue. We've had some generous donors. We did a Giving Tuesday campaign, and we were able to gain some more funding, but we are in need of funding for paying for the interpreters, paying for the assistive technology that we need to create an accessible virtual space here, and to continue on with Justin's room, which is going to start up in January, and Judy's room, which is another option that's happening through Mind Freedom. You can go to the iloveyouleadon.com website to find out about that. So this is one of our committee members, Ashton, who has done a wonderful pitch for us about supporting Devva's Room.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Devva's Room. Devva's Room is a virtual space open to all, seeking to bring anyone interested in disability studies together in conversation and in solidarity. Devva's Room is inspired by the life and legacy of Devva Kasnitz and her outstanding contributions to the field of disability studies. Devva's Room is volunteer-led by members of the Disability History and Culture Collective and the I Love You Lead On community. In a 2023 reflection, Devva wrote of her determination to be more comfortable in study and advocacy and to blend them together to create a diaspora of disability studies best ideas. By holding regular events led by prominent and emerging voices in disability studies, we hope to honor this mission. Devva believed in a fully inclusive world that respected everyone's communication strategies. Inclusive and accessible technology can be costly. You can help support technology expenses for Devva's Room, which will allow us to grow and expand. If you have the resources to contribute to the development and sustainability of Devva's Room, please consider donating by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting the link in the chat, donorbox.org/Devva-S-room. Thank you so much for showing up and learning together with us.
And I know that went by quickly, but it is also on our website, as well as some of the additional ways of donating that we set up for the last Giving Tuesday campaign. Katya has had their hand raised. So Katya, you want to come off mic?
Yes, Katya speaking. Something I was curious about in the discussion of this idea of impossible cases, and particularly of violence, is whether or not there was or is a formal effort to sort what behaviors are related to initial diagnosis versus what is the symptomology of PTSD, CPTSD, given the history of egregious abuse, and how that fits into this question of, as you said, oppression leads to resistance of all kinds, but also trauma leads to its own symptomology, and how is the independent diagnosis of PTSD or CPTSD being examined and understood in context of the victims of this system?
I'm not one to dodge a question, but I'm not clinically trained, and that may be a clinical question. But as a scientific question, I'd like to say a word, and that is trying to separate cause and effect. Can we say that an actual diagnostic or clinical condition, a disease process, causes challenging or self-damaging behavior? Well, maybe. But to separate that from the reaction to the abuse that one has received, I can't do it. My research didn't do it. I don't know what to say. I'd like to refer that to a clinical behavioral expert. And I know that everybody in the modern world says behavior is communication. And so I will wind up kind of dodging the question because I don't know.
Just a quick clarification follow-up. You're also not aware of a systemic effort to do an epidemiological study of post-traumatic stress disorder or complex PTSD in this population as part of the documentation of effects of institutionalization?
No, I don't know that literature, if there is any.
Seems like it's something that is a shame that was not explored if it isn't, or is not more prominent if it is.
I agree.
Thank you.
Fred, go ahead and take yourself off mute.
Hi, Fred.
Comment and a question. I worked at a facility during many of our so-called problem behaviors were the direct result of idiotic rules that were handed down by people who had no direct experience working with the kids that we were working with. And so, I mean, there's that. The question I had is, did you have, in doing your research and the studies, did you have any issues with confidentiality in terms of accessing and using institution records that might be considered medical records? And if so, how did you handle that?
Man, to this day, this haunts me. We did not have problems because our study, when it was proposed and funded by the federal government, the federal judge, Raymond Broderick, said, "You shall have complete access." And he overruled all of HIPAA and all the Privacy Act of 1973. And so we became an arm of the state, and we had complete access to all records. So
Wow.
ever since then, when we repeated the study in other states, we didn't have that. So it didn't matter, really. I could argue it didn't matter because we went and got informed consent from every individual person or whoever knew them best in every case. So we followed what I knew was the rules. I knew about Nuremberg even when I was a child scientist. And then the advent of privacy and in health records and so forth, I knew all about it. But I'd like to add one little footnote. In all of his years on the bench on the Pennhurst case, Judge Raymond Broderick said, "These people don't need their identities protected. They've done nothing wrong." And he adopted the same approach as the Holocaust centers, which say, we will use the names of the people who were victimized because their stories need to be told and they want to be told. And I feel personally that way. I'll follow the rules and we'll go informed consent because it's respectful. But by God, don't get in our way of telling their stories.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
There's
you.
a lot going on that issue, by the way, in Massachusetts, and we're going to copy what you've done in Pennsylvania as best we can. I get a call or an email twice a month from family members who say, "I had a relative at Pennhurst. I didn't even know about it. How can I find out more?" And well, the answer is, "Oh my God, it's really hard," which is awful. And I'm sick of it. Everybody who calls me, and if they were in the Pennhurst study, I tell them everything. And I've reunited 10, 15 families. But we've got to change the records laws in the U.S. So if you'd like to comment on that, please do right now.
David, go ahead.
To that last issue, in the terms of people at Willowbrook, the state has, and Willowbrook is, kind of a sister institution, more or less about the same time, maybe a couple of years before the things that happened at Pennhurst happened at Willowbrook. The difference is that the state in New York had so much money that it had milked from the federal government and Medicaid dollars that it felt like it had this empire it had to protect. And it wouldn't let scientists really study the population. That went through into the 2006 or 7 when I tried to get access to medical records. They did everything they could to make sure that I couldn't get to them. And to this day, there has never been a systematic study of that population and how they fared. There is a lot of suspicion that the promises that were made to them were not kept. In fact, there's a little film about that, promises not kept. But yes, what was happening was they were using the privacy of the individuals as the reason why we couldn't study them. So it was exactly the same kind of thing, trying to dodge responsibility by using privacy as an issue.
Yeah, I mean that.
Just
Yeah,
quickly is that, Jim's work is regarded as the most systematic and comprehensive work. He uses more or less a combination of methods, uh, a lot of survey method and interviews and things like that. People like, let's say, Bob Edgerton out in California used more of an ethnographic or qualitative approach to looking at some of these issues. There's a book, Cloak of Competence, that you might know, Jim, that was published in 68. And he had students, I would regard myself as one of them. And we did these kind of qualitative, quantifiable, descriptive studies, which gives you another view, not that it's inconsistent, but just a different kind of view of these places and what happened afterwards. And I, for one, am very, I agree with the overall characterization of what's happened with the deinstitutionalization movement, but it's often, phrased in a way that sounds so hopeful and so that it's not realistic. Because what actually happened, even with people with intellectual disability, a lot of people ended up in other kinds of places, nursing homes, prisons, even in large facilities. They used to call them ICFMRs, 14 people big, and even in smaller facilities that you could characterize, if you ever went and visited them, as mini institutions. So it's a very mixed, and I'm not as, I guess I'm worried also about now about the welfare of these people, because they're hidden away relatively, because there are in these small places much more difficult to get a handle on what's going on in all of them, and you have these staff issues that have never gone away. They've been there since the beginning. Underpaid staff, undersupervised staff, undertrained staff, staff that have problems that are difficult to get rid of. And so I don't want to sound like, throwing a wrench into the works, but I'm not quite as hopeful as maybe some of the people who have been talking on this Zoom.
Well, there's reasons for what you say, David, lots of reason, because the community system is in crisis, and it's about staffing, recruitment, retention, and pay and benefits. And we haven't done the right thing. In our generation, we did do something wonderful, and it's being threatened right now. So if we learn anything from this positive presentation today, it's to recommit, because we've never been under such great threat of being sent back as today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
This is Alice again. That was going to be my next question, is like, how many places still exist where you're talking about smaller facilities where there still are issues, or even people that are in homes, but the staffing and the training is an issue. And then also on your chart, you talked about the states you were in, and I didn't see Tennessee on the list, but we did close all of ours, except for, I think there's still one open. I think Moccasin Bend might still be open, and Orange Grove, I'm not sure where they fit in Chattanooga. So again, if you can speak more to, like, how do we make sure that we don't end up, other than knowing the current climate, what can we be doing so that we can make sure that people get the individualized multidisciplinary care that they need and deserve?
Gee, being a scientist, I'm not one to speak about political action, but I do know it's time. It's time to scream our heads off when they start talking about rounding up the homeless and building new institutions for them. We all are in danger. This is eugenics on fire in this country, in my opinion, and I'm deadly afraid of it. We're not going to get a lot of help from Medicaid, Medicare, waivers are probably going to be cut back. I'd say we're in trouble. Political action is probably the best thing we can do right now. And I could go on, but instead I'll tell a story for David Good. Willowbrook, actually the situation of Willowbrook, which was the first really big lawsuit on exodus out of an institution on Staten Island. Willowbrook is the reason why the Pennhurst study was created. When it looked like we were going to win the lawsuit down here, the lawyers and I took a train up to Manhattan and met with the Willowbrook review panel. And lots of questions were asked because we didn't know what remedy to ask for. So we learned a lot from Jennifer House and Michael Ottman. And I had only one question. 2,000 people have left. How are they doing? And nobody knew. And that was no good. And that's what created the Pennhurst study. That right there. I couldn't tolerate that because we had to know if people were better off. So with that, I'll go back to urging us all to political action.
Other questions, comments? I feel like I'm walking down history lane, having been in the classroom with students that were institutionalized and spending a lot of time out in the institutions on the weekends. A friend of mine and I, we were young and
Brooke was trying to get in, and then we didn't let him.
Sorry.
Okay, Brooke, are you in? And I believe Katya has another question. Go ahead and unmute.
Katya speaking. Continuing on this challenge of what are the next steps? Though, and as I said in the chat, number one is fair pay, as the extreme low pay and lack of health care means most of the people doing this work are undertrained, stressed out, hate their jobs, and far too many of them respond to that stress by engaging in harmful, if not technically abusive or violent behavior to the people in their care. And until it is treated as an expert job with very high training standards and rate of pay appropriate to the challenges of it, the cycle of undertrained, abusive staff is going to stay. But going to my new question, and this is a rather complicated one, so might be drifting too far off topic, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the problem of the ongoing problem of least restrictive environment for education for youth with high needs in public schools, and the way in which there is an ongoing challenge of the level of disruption tolerated before removal from the classroom or shift to a different environment is becoming deeply challenging to teach students, all of the students, on account of daily disruption of the few, and how that negotiation might be addressed or changed so that students with disabilities are getting the fair education that they are guaranteed, but students with or without disabilities, the rest of the class, is still able to learn without the problem of disruption from screaming or violence or otherwise prevention of teaching. Thank you.
Yeah, I do have something to say. First, I was a witness in most of the big special ed cases in America, like from the right to education in Pennsylvania and the consent, the movements for contempt for failure to implement the right to education, onward to the biggest one in Pennsylvania, and lawsuits in California and Oklahoma and so on. I was a witness in all those cases, but I can't answer your question properly. But I do recommend strongly that you ask Judy Gran to come and speak to you. Judy Gran was one of the original Pennhurst attorneys who has spent the last 40 years. She is still the attorney of record for the Pennhurst class members, but she spent the last 40 years taking on cases of individual violations of student rights and least restrictive environment violations. Judy Gran is the board officer of the Pennhurst Memorial Alliance, and I'm sure she'll be very glad to get on with you about that very question. And I'll put her email into the chat if I get a chance.
Thank you.
Diane said that she wanted to thank you for offering this opportunity. She had to leave, but she also commented, as a family member, I do worry that my child has a right to care in an institution, but HCBS are optional. We need to do that.
That's the worst ridiculousness in our field. We tried to change that in 1983, and it's still here. It's a right to be in an institution, and it's a privilege to be in the community. It's illegal. I can't believe it's still there. But that's one fight we could all take on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ICFMR is an entitlement, and waivers are an optional service. Oh, that's so sad.
I appreciated Katya's question about this issue. David, you want to unmute?
Just quickly, the staff issue, which again, I entered the field in '73, and at that time it was already a major issue, at least in California. And I think what was said earlier about needing more money to pay the staff is true, but it's not the answer. And people have tried to throw money at it. It's not the money only. It has to do with especially the kind of skills that you need to manage a workforce that is absent. The middle level management in a lot of these places is they just don't have. They promote from within, but they don't have people trained in how to do conflict resolution, do a lot of the things that managers would have to know how to do if they were to work in this kind of difficult environment. And also it's a question of the kind of training that everybody in the field gets, and attitudes and values, and making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page, and having effective tools to do that. And I think they do exist, but they're not used in the field. So I just would add, to the earlier remarks about we need to, get better pay, and that we need to do that, but we need to do a lot more than just that. We need to manage this workforce in a way that they can be managed, because the skills are there. It's just that the field is so poor, they can't bring them into the field.
Well, political action again. I got to tell you, I spent 15 years working with the Service Employees International Union on the premise that the workers, the direct support workers in all these fields, should unionize. And providers will fight that to the death. And our government, at least on the right-wing side, will fight that to the death. But if you want to get fair pay and benefits, you unionize. And if we took that as a goal and advocated for it, we could combine the unions for the folks we are most interested in with the folks who support elders in all kinds of facilities. And then it becomes a big unionization movement. I worked for 15 years to make that happen, and the forces against it are very powerful. But I still think it will help.
And Katya put something in the chat. A huge part of the problem is ideology of, in quotes, care work and the straight up misogyny of pretending that training isn't needed and respect isn't deserved for doing the labor. And that's exactly what you just talked about. If we can join the forces and have the right training. Fred, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yeah. When you talked about elders, I mean, we live in a society where the go-to solution for elders who may have particular problems is to institutionalize them. And we have this billion-dollar nursing home industry, which is by and large for profit, and that I don't know, that just seems to be our go-to. And I do understand that there's financial incentive for certain people to support that model, but when you look at it, it's just a terrible way to deal with all of these different issues. So, yeah, political action.
To some people, the alliance of disability advocacy with elder advocacy is going to strengthen everybody. I worked with a gerontologist for the last 25 years to say that we'd like to die when there's the number of people in nursing homes has been cut in half or 2/3. It's just an awful way to end your life.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry.
Fred, you know Bill's book.
Yes.
That's the book that addresses that frontally,
Yeah.
And you're talking about Bill Bronston's book, David?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, for people that may not know. Jim, could you put your contact information for people in the chat? I'm not sure if everyone is still on the call that asked for that back in the chat.
Sure. And wait a minute. I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to put something on the share screen.
Monica Thomas, I don't know if she's still on the call, is doing some research and is interested in getting your contact information.
Well, I'm having trouble getting back to the chat, but let me talk before. If I were to ask you what are the 4 top things I'd like people to remember, it would be there was a tremendous misunderstanding in my lifetime between what America did for folks in psychiatric hospitals and what America did for folks in state institutions for people with disabilities. And that was a huge misunderstanding. And David, you said that a lot of people wound up homeless and in jail. That was true in the mental health deinstitutionalization, but the number of people who left Pennhurst who wound up homeless or in jail out of 1,156 was 0. And in all the studies I did in all those states, it was negligible. So the difference is huge. Second, smaller homes are better. Third, please understand that parents are attached to their institutional models because we forced it on them, but they will change radically. And finally, what we learned from Pennhurst has changed the world. New Zealand, because of the Pennhurst study, and I know the guy involved, closed its final institution in 1999 because they believed they should on the basis of scientific research. And late tonight, I'll be talking to Korea to commemorate the ending of their 10-year longitudinal study of moving people out of institutions in Korea. And this has happened all over the world. So with that takeaway, I'm going to stop the share and put my contact info in the chat.
And I see it, judith@rgz.law.
And that is Judy Grant. I urge you to contact
that's Judy. Okay.
And invite her.
Okay. And you're putting yours in. Katya also commented, the capitalist model of medical care and support of vulnerable populations will never result in good outcomes. It cannot when the primary goal is maximum profit and not best outcomes. And Susan, of course, also put in the chat, if you build them, we will fill them. No vacancies in nursing homes.
Yeah.
Health,
my degree's in sociology, and I got to tell you, Katya, we should talk because capitalism and quality healthcare do not work.
Health
It's
communism.
not a
That's
good
the book.
combination.
Is
Health
that Bill's
communism.
book?
No, it's a
No,
different book. It's
that,
called
yeah, that's
Health Communism, and it's a somewhat technical book, but very much to the point of why capitalism produces dependent populations that we pay to take care of. Lots of them, all kinds of them.
I'm wondering if there's a particular model that people can point to where all of these issues are being handled in a humane way that's sustainable. I mean, what would come closest in your opinion?
Well, I can answer it, and it's Scandinavia right now, at least. I did 3 tours of duty in Finland and a lot of time in Sweden and so forth and so on. But I'll just illustrate it with a story of personal experience in Finland. I was visiting a group home, which was large, 8 people, and I met a young man in his mid-20s and seemed healthy and athletic and I don't know, well educated. And I asked him, "How'd you get into this field?" And he said, "Well, I got a master's degree in international economics, but I took the job here for the money."
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, in
I've never, I've
Scandinavia,
never forgotten that study because they have an ethos that is quite different from ours. It's not every man for himself. It's we're all in this together. And that really, I think it speaks of a different form of government.
there's
Yeah.
that, and there's also the fact that the direct care workers under the social pedagogic model, which is used in all the countries in different ways, they go to school for 3 or 4 years. They're paid well. There's no, when you go in those countries, it's like it's not heaven, but you go, wow, this is fantastic. Look how this works. It's great. And then the first thing that comes into my mind and other people, we'll bring it back here. We'll bring that idea back here. But you can't. Not that way because we don't have anything like the resources, and they don't anymore either. Now, I mean, these intense resources they put into social programs have come back to haunt them, and there's a lot of retraction in a lot of these places and people not doing as well as they did maybe 10, 15 years ago. But there's no question that if you were going to say, where would you go to point to a model that is the best one, I would say, Jim is right. The Scandinavian countries best I've ever seen.
Later.
Katya
Later.
also
Yeah,
posted in the
that's my
chat,
fault.
socialized medicine that operates on a scarcity model that seeks to minimize use of care is also innately abuse. The only model that will ever work towards one that prioritized outcome and trains and funds to match that goal.
And that's why the Scandinavian governments are successful in this regard, I think.
Sharon's posted the slide about helping to make this space accessible, again with the QR code and the link to donate. The donate link is I love you, I and love and you are all capitalized, -lead on, both capitalized.com/donate. And our work includes the Disability History and Culture Collective, DHACC, this space, Devva's room, Judy's room, Justin's room, and other events on the horizon, including the one that we've talked about on December 23rd. So if you have people that you know of that you want to share that information with, we'll have it up on our website. We just solidified the graphic for it this afternoon. Katya, go ahead.
Katya speaking again. I have another question for Jim. You've mentioned or indicated several times where you think that, for very good reason, that there were mistakes in how things were done in deinstitutionalization. Is there anything in particular, 1 or 2 factors you would point to as your biggest regrets for how things were handled, and where you would say need to go back and be fixed most urgently, looking towards a more just future?
Yeah, boy. Thank you. First, selling deinstitutionalization on the basis of cost savings to legislatures. Terrible mistake. Second, our failure to combine and unionize into political action. Because without that, we never got the salaries and the respect that the workers need. And I'm not sure what the third should be, but those two lead the pack for me. How about you?
Yeah, those seem to be at the top of the pack, and I appreciate your insight. I've come in at a different place and through a different door, in that my research is on art and culture representations of disability and its interaction with political oppression. But
Well,
the
I'm sorry. I almost interrupted. Sorry.
I was going to say the scientific analytic material that you and your colleagues and then the current generation that's doing the same work create is deeply appreciated as I fold that into my more cultural studies research, as my big research interest is this tipping balancing point of how the concept of the human is applied or removed from populations in art and cultural product, and how that interacts then with policy and the cycle of dehumanization to failures of care, to dehumanization, to failures of care.
Great. Well, then that would relate to, while you're talking, thank you very much, that relates directly to my third, which would have been, we failed to let America know what happened. We failed to tell people that putting folks away is bad. Nobody knows that, even now. So we failed. And that's why, since 1998, I've devoted a big part of my energy toward museums. Because we've got to have places, not actual physical places, but places for people to go easily and accessibly and learn. Something wonderful happened, and we have to preserve it. And we failed. So it's maybe not too late for the museum approach, but we have to tell the public we're about to lose something precious.
Yep. And then also the flip side of what failed and therefore needs to be changed to tell the whole story. I agree. Thank you so much for all of your work on this.
Thank you. Great interaction, Katya.
I had a conversation. We were talking about unionizing and working with the unions. I had a conversation many years ago with Thomas Gilhul, and he told me a story about actually at the beginning of the Pennhurst activism and park and everything. They went to union activists and said, "Here's an because there was opposition from unions to deinstitutionalization because many of those workers were in fact unionized, although it didn't seem to do them a whole lot of good in terms of working conditions and salary. But Tom said that, we went to the unions and said, this is a great opportunity for you because there are going to be so many jobs out in the community, and it's fertile ground for your organizing efforts. And they were just turned down, flatly said, not interested, not interested. So I don't know if you should be blaming yourself, for that effort not happening, because you really, you need two sides to work on that. I mean,
good point and true story. Thanks, Fred. But in the late 90s, the biggest union in America, SEIU, turned around.
I'm a member.
I've worked with them for years, and they were, in fact, the president, Andy Stern, had a daughter with disability, and he realized after a lot of interaction, oh my God, she would be in a nursing home if the world hadn't changed. And so he steered SEIU with 600,000 members, or maybe it was 2 million. Anyway, a lot of members. And he steered it to, okay, guys, we cannot make a living off human misery anymore, ever.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
SEIU became an advocate, and we can still work with them.
yeah, SEIU has been really active in Massachusetts. They've unionized the PCA task force, which has been really important.
Great.
So
That's wonderful.
The other failure I would add, Jim, is kind of what Ed Roberts said. At the beginning of the disability rights movement, Ed and Judy and people like and Joan, they looked at it as a transformative movement for everybody, not just for persons with disabilities. And what Ed always felt was that the bottom line, the thing that most impeded progress for all people, was the idea that people have attitudes about disability and sickness and aging that made them not accept this as part of and a good part of human life. And Ed was always out there trying to convince people, about and through jokes, like he would say, he would characterize himself, and I'm here as a vegetable. That's what they called me when I got sick, and I'm a vegetable. I'm a artichoke, sticky on the outside, but with a lot of heart. And and it was that kind of thing that he felt he needed to do, because he felt that it was that level that people needed to be reached. And I mean, people try, and I try, and you try, we all try to do that, but I think that that's the ultimate challenge. Like the arrangements of the money and all that stuff is important, but if people don't understand that all human beings are equal to one another, then it's going to be difficult to produce good effects.
we seem to be moving in the opposite direction at this point.
Yep. We're hate fueled right now.
Yeah. I have to sign off. My fatigue level, I'm going to collapse. But this
Thank
is
you
a
for
great
coming, Fred.
Well, thank you for having me, and this is a great presentation. Yeah. So,
Well,
okay.
me
Take
too.
care.
I got to get up at 1 o'clock to talk to Korea, so let me out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
We could hear from you all night, Jim. Maybe we'll have to have you back.
Oh, I'd love to hear myself talk, don't I?
And you and David and Fred can all talk about lots of things. So we have on the screen the updated information, schedule and registration details. I love you leadon.com/Devva, or the bit.ly/Devva's room link. There's also a QR code on the screen. We have recorded the past episodes, and they're up on a YouTube playlist, which is bit.ly/Devva's room playlist. Devva's room playlist are all capitalized. They're on YouTube, and so you can go back, and we'll have this one ready in as quickly as we can. We want to make sure that the captioning and the transcript and the video flows well together. We'll check everybody's names and things like that. Tasha said, thank you so much for the discussion. I need to leave for another obligation. Katya also said, so many of the money and care failures follow the dehumanization of vulnerable populations, exactly what you were saying, including with persons with disabilities. David commented, thank you all, I learned a lot, as I did as well. We'll be back with Devva's room next month, as we said earlier, with a tour of the Viscardi Museum and a discussion about who Henry Viscardi was. Any final thoughts, Susan? Katya says, thank you so much for your presentation, Jim.
And
Everyone's comments and
we
all the work done.
mentioned Bill Bronston a few times. He's going to be in Judy's room in January. He comes to Judy's room fairly frequently because he's so well loved. And he promised he'd be back in January, so that's the plan. January will also be Justin's room, the first Justin's room, where people will share memories about Justin Yoshiko, and if they don't actually have memories, what impact what they had done in their lives had on them. So it'll be a time to remember the two of them and sort of the influences they've been. And each month, that's what Justin will do. Justin's room is going to be, we'll have one person that will sort of talk about, but if you have other stories to tell, you can tell other stories. But January will be Justin Yoshiko Dirt. And then in February, it's going to be Alice Wong. And we're still debating about March. But I think, well, won't say because it's not set in stone yet. But it's always nice if people have ideas of people who they think would be great as presenters, or if they want to present themselves, or a topic that they think needs to be addressed. We've got lots of things going on, and we're welcome to people being participants in the planning and in the joining us.
Susan talks about the planning. We meet regularly on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So I've been taking down your information if you put it in the chat. We have two Google Groups list, one for disability history and one for general advocacy. So we'd be happy to make sure that you get that information, but we're usually on about 4 o'clock every Wednesday, unless there's a holiday of some sort that we feel it's respectful to observe.
So Jim, before we end, I want to let everybody know the importance you were in my life.
Oh,
My son started in inclusion in 1989. And at that point, inclusion was very difficult. But because he was little, I found people to back and was able to do it. But as time went on, each year it was harder and harder and harder to keep inclusion going because of things that people said about his future and what being in the community would be like. And you were cited when he was in junior high repeatedly about how important it was that he was in the community. And that was when your research was just coming out. So you were really important to keeping my kid included. And he's 42 now, and he is the person in part who he is because he was fully included. And I know I can see the difference between kids that have experienced inclusion and those that haven't in his peers. So the work that you did is still important to this very day because it's changing the lives of adults that are still with us, that still had inclusion in the communities or didn't.
thank you, Susan. And the same goes for my daughter. I
Thank
learned
you.
that helped us keep our daughter out of segregated settings when she was in special ed and got thrown out of school and so forth. But she's still here. She's a responsible adult, lives with us, and we love her, and she's great. So thank you, Susan, for saying that. And I feel the same about my own daughter.
We clearly need to have Jim back to talk about what's going on in Korea. I would love to know about that. And also just talk more about this very important research and the very important need to document this and make sure that it isn't lost. So the ZM groups, hopefully, Jim, you'll be sharing on the 23rd, joining us in that group, because hopefully we can start to gather the people that are doing research, doing collections, trying to make sure these stories don't get lost.